Chapter 3. From Bright to Bored. Which would you rather have? 10 you found or 5 you earned? Became a man at 6, 'cause at 5 you learned to take nothing for granted except death. Man of the house, 'cause you the last nigga left. There are two words that come to mind whenever I think of my time spent in elementary school. The first one was bright. Your son is extremely bright. I would hear teachers tell my mother during their parent teacher conferences. Or I would see very bright written in the comment section of my report card. I didn't know what the term meant, let alone that it was something positive. What do you mean, bright? Is there a light bulb over my head like in the cartoons? The second word I heard used to describe me was manipulative. Earl is very manipulative, Mrs. Simmons. I figured that one wasn't so good. As a kid, I loved to read. I was just so into words. I loved to read all of the Dr. Seuss books and books like Where the Wild Things Are that had all those funny looking monsters with the giant heads. I was into any books that had to do with dinosaurs. For most of my time in elementary school, the principal put me in this advanced reading class that had only 6 or 7 kids. In the morning, I would go to my regular class, but then every day at a certain time, another teacher would take me and a group of kids into the old music room where we would do more advanced work. I was in advanced classes. Bonita was in special ed. I remember my third grade teacher, Mrs. Smith, one of those black, no nonsense types. She was short, kept her hair in a bun, and wore the tight face that said no bullshit. She would always pull me and some of the other kids aside and be like, listen, boys, you got it harder 'cause you black, and I'm not going to let you make a fool of yourselves in front of this class. You could tell she cared about you by those talks. Earl, I know your mama raised you better than that, she would tell me whenever I was messing around. She was the only teacher I ever had that did that, and I always did good in her class. Ever since I first learned how to read, I was a big spelling nut, and every Tuesday, Mrs. Smith would have a spelling bee. If you won the spelling bee, not only would your name go up on the bulletin board, but she would buy you a wedge sandwich around the corner from Landy's Deli. Now, every kid in Yonkers knew about Landy's wedges. You would have shit if you came to school with food from there. It was like having a pair of Pro-Ked sneakers on or something because the sandwiches were so damn good. The bread was always soft and the tomatoes were sliced real thin. They added just the right amount of oil and vinegar. While some of the kids had the money to buy their lunch from there anyway, and others always had money to buy extra things in the lunchroom, I had nothing. All I had was one big lunch ticket that they'd punch holes in every day. That meant all I could eat was the exact food the school gave out. No cookies, no ice cream, no chocolate milk. If I was lucky, my mother would give me some crackers to bring from home. But all she would ever buy would be the nasty, unsalted kind. I hated those. So the spelling bee was big. It was the chance for me to be the best in the class and eat like the kids who had money. Every week, I sat in my room and memorized each and every one of those words. It was hard, but I liked to do it. And once I learned a word, I never forgot it. Because I spent all week studying and knew all of the words by heart, week after week, none of the other kids could beat me. It got to the point where every Tuesday I would go to school looking forward to a Landy's wedge. And after a few months, my spelling got so good, I could spell almost anything. I remember I used to think Empire State Building was one word, and I knew how to spell it. I was so proud of myself. Mama, can I tell you something? When my mother had company, I used to try to wait for a good time to go into the living room. What is it, Earl? Mama, I can spell Empire State Building. She'd stop whatever it was she was talking about for a second, but never really turned her head all the way. Oh, that's nice, baby. Now go to your room, okay? Because grown folks are talking. But Mama, I can spell. Go to your room, Earl. It was like she couldn't be bothered, like I was always interrupting her. I just wanted to tell her what I knew, to show her how I was doing good in school. What the hell was wrong with that? It was like my moms didn't give a fuck. And I guess that's why she never made me feel like I was worth anything. But I couldn't understand that. I couldn't understand that because I was good. I was a good motherfucking kid. As the third grade went on, I started getting bored. The challenge of the spelling bees came only once a week, and the other days I just got tired of doing what felt like the same work over and over again. Nothing in school inspired me, and after I learned all of the material and finished all of the assignments they gave me, I didn't have anything else to do. One afternoon, Mrs. Smith pulled me aside to ask me why I seemed so unmotivated, but I told her that I was doing everything that she gave me to do. If I'm still going to get 100%, why should I do any more than I have to? If it only takes me 60% effort to get 100% results, why should I do 80? It was like when I finished taking a test ahead of everybody else, she wanted me to just sit there with my hands folded and my pencil down. I wasn't supposed to do anything. I wasn't supposed to look at nobody, but there was another half an hour left. Oh no, I can't just sit here. Especially after I just taken a test and my mind was thirsty. I had to do something. So first, I'd wait about 10 more minutes to see if anyone else would finish so that I'd have a partner. Then, if no one was done, I'd just say, fuck it, it's spitball time. Splat! I hit a kid in the front of the class on the back of the neck. As soon as he turned around, I put my head down like I was sleeping. Splat, splat! I'd hit him again, and then he'd get mad and tell Mrs. Smith, but she wouldn't know who hit him. Then, as soon as she turned around again, I'd sneak an eraser off the blackboard and throw it across the room. Earl! What's up? It wasn't me, Mrs. Smith. After I started throwing erasers, it wasn't long before I quickly became the wildest nigga in school. I used to just zap out, do the things that made other kids say, oh shit, when they weren't supposed to say, oh shit. Then I would stab them with a pencil. That really made them curse. Mrs. Smith would punish me by keeping me after school. 3 or 4 times a week, I would have to stay in her class an extra half an hour for detention. But that didn't bother me. I didn't want to be home anyway. And I found out that after school was a great time to steal. See, most of my classmates' parents didn't allow their children to have toys, but the rich kids would buy them anyway, so they could show them off in the cafeteria. Look what I got, the new red matchbox. Since their parents would find the cars if they brought them home, they'd leave them in their desks at school. So during detention, when the teacher would go to the office or step out to have a cigarette, I would just raid their desks and grab all of the toys I could find. The next day, the kids would know it was me that took them because I was the only one who had to stay after. But they couldn't say anything because they weren't supposed to have them in the first place. And I'd probably spit on them for snitching. After a while, some of the smarter kids thought they could hide their goods after school without me noticing it. But I saw you. I saw you try to hide that matchbox in your desk behind your notebook. Now all I gotta do is wait you out. I bet you go home before me, punk. And when you leave, your car is mine. It was like I was a step ahead of everyone around me. One time I actually had the main office believing that I had moved, that I had a different address and phone number so that they could never find my mother to tell her what I was doing. When my mother finally came to the school, wondering why she hadn't gotten any letters from them in a while, they told her, well, Earl looks so sincere. I understand why School 18 had no idea what to do with me. To them, they were just supposed to be good, smart kids and bad, dumb ones. But I wasn't either of those. One year, I remember they tried to leave me back because of my bad behavior, but they couldn't do it when my mother reminded them that I was the top student in my class. When they kept arguing with her about it, she had me IQ tested. And when my scores came back higher than some kids that were 2 and 3 years older than me, they had to promote me. But the smarter I got, the more bored I got. And the more bored I got, the more trouble I caused. Then no one cared how smart I was. It was a fucked up cycle, and through it all, I just felt that I wasn't being heard. I wasn't being allowed to fly. One day, I didn't go home after school. Me and this kid named Barron had detention together, and afterwards, he invited me over to his house. He had a pretty sister, so first we hung out with her, then we went to the supermarket and stole some gum and stayed outside to play. After a few hours running around, we found this big car tire in this garage near his house. It was already after dark, and I had never been out this late by myself before, but we were having so much fun rolling the tire up and down up this little hill, watching it crash into things. I didn't want to stop. It was a school night. I had a pocket full of gum, a tire, freedom. Fuck the world, man. Then we saw the flashing lights of a police car. There weren't any street lights where we were playing, so the blue and red colors lit up everything. I thought the police were coming to mess with us for the tire until I saw my mother in the back seat. Oh shit, we're in trouble. My mother was scared to death. She had been looking for me since 4 o'clock and had made the cops drive her around all of Yonkers. When they passed this street, she caught a glimpse of a little boy playing with a tire and just knew it was me. Let me out of here! Let me out of here! She started screaming. That's my baby. The cops got out first. Do you know how much you scared your mother, Earl? I shook my head. Then they asked me if I wanted to go home, and I shook my head again. I could see the belt curled up in my mother's lap. As soon as he saw the cops, Barron had run back around the corner to his house. I wish I was him. The cops saw how upset my mother was, so they tried to calm her down before they told me to get in the car. But when I got in the back seat, instead of being scared of her, I just saw how upset she looked. She was shaking. Her eyes were red from crying. Oh shit, my mother does care about me. When we got home, my Uncle Pinky was sitting on the couch. Don't whip him, Ned, he said to her after she told him what had happened. Just talk to him. And that's what she did. My mother brought me into the kitchen and sat me in front of the stove. We always kept our oven door open to help heat the apartment, and I can remember feeling the hot air hitting me on my back. I'm just so glad to see that you're okay, baby. You had me so scared, Earl. So I'm not going to do anything to you this time, okay? I'm just happy to see you. Then she paused and stared me right in my face. But if you ever do that again, I'm gonna. 2 days later, I did it again. I was in the new park I always wanted to go to around the corner from our building. It was about 7 p.m. Stupid me for being there. As a child, anytime I did something wrong, I used to feel like I had to go to the bathroom. I don't know what it was, but when I knew I was in trouble, I had to pee bad as a motherfucker. I guess I was just nervous. That day, I almost peed all over my pants. First, my mother beat me in the park. Then she beat me all the way home, making me stop on each corner so she could get all of her hits in. When we got home, she got the stick. You're a big man now, right? You want to stay out late like this? She was standing over me in the hallway, hitting me in my chest. You're a big man now, right? No, mama, no. You out this late, you must be doing something. So where's my money, huh? No, mama, I'm not doing nothing. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Because you're a big man now. Where's my money, Earl? She stopped when the stick caught me in the face. I used to stay getting beatings. Extension cords, hangers, brooms. My sister used to always cry, yell at my mother to stop, but mom never did. After a while, it became normal. If that's all you know, as a kid, you get used to it. It's just your life. I stayed wanting to play outside though. Everybody else got to play outside. Why do I have to go straight home, upstairs in the fucking house? Fuck you. I want to do what the rest of the kids get to do. Let me live, lady. But we ain't like everybody else. My mother always swore we were better than somebody. The funny thing was, in the neighborhood, I was the kid who was the problem. I don't want you with that boy, my mother always told me. Yeah, okay. His mother don't want him with me either, so we're even. My mother didn't understand that parents got scared of kids they never saw outside because that's what they used to do with crazy kids, keep them in the house. After a whole year of not seeing a kid outside that you know lives in the building, as a parent, it's only natural to get nervous. Make sure you don't play with Earl. Something ain't right with him. I used to hear parents tell their kids all the time. All my friends used to come up to me and tell me, my mama said I can't play with you no more. After a while, only the homeless kids around School Street could fuck with me, or the kids with parents who were high or didn't give a fuck. By this time, my father had disappeared too, so I couldn't complain to him about my mother's rules. At first, he would call to say he was taking me to New York and then never show up. Then he just stopped calling altogether. I had a feeling something was going on. My mother said it was because he met another woman, a white woman who lived on Woodworth Street. My mom's was never what my father wanted, and living with my mom, I knew the feeling was mutual, so I couldn't have expected them to be together. But I took my father's leaving really hard. Chapter 4, The Holloway House. Life for me was very different at 19 Lamartine Terrace. That's because the house belonged to Mary Ella Holloway, my grandmother. My father was one of her 11 kids, 8 boys and 3 girls, and was the first to add another baby to the family, so I was her first grandson. Since everyone else lived in the projects or tiny apartments, Grandma's house was the home base for my father's side of the family, and I knew that any time I could make it over there, 4 or 5 of my aunts and uncles would be there too. Needless to say, I wanted to take the bus to Grandma's as much as I could. Most of my aunts, Rhonda, Raquel, and uncles, Jarvis, Buckeye, were much older than I was, but 2 of my uncles, Collins, we called him Collie or BJ, and Kisley, better known as Buzzy, were a little younger than me, so the 3 of us became like brothers. Part of the reason I loved going over to my grandmother's house was that I knew I could hang out with them, and we were all allowed outside to play. I also lived without fear of constant whippings. Since I was my grandmother's baby, she rarely punished me, and since she also had bad asthma like I did, whenever I had trouble breathing, Grandma would take care of me and even let me sleep in her bed when I wanted to. She worked as a nurse in the New Rochelle Hospital, and whenever I thought I was getting an attack, she used to watch over me all night. Grandma was disappointed that her son wasn't taking better care of me, but that didn't matter. Grandma always took care of her baby. My grandmother didn't like my mother very much. She didn't like the way she was raising me, didn't like all the beatings. I used to hear the 2 of them arguing about me on the telephone. My grandmother felt like my mother should be doing more, felt that if she just paid attention and went up to school 18 more often to check on me, I wouldn't have so many problems. My mother would get mad and say that she couldn't go up to my school every day because she had to work and ultimately told my grandmother to mind her business and worry about her own kids. What is your son doing to help? She used to always tell her. But I felt loved at my grandmother's house. I can remember the gospel music playing on Sunday morning when I woke up, my grandmother singing Amazing Grace. And even though I never saw my father over there, Grandma's felt like the place I was supposed to be. It was also the place to find the best Sunday dinner. My great grandmother, Irene, and Aunt Raquella would spend all of Sunday morning making plates and plates of food. And by mid afternoon, the entire Holloway family would be over talking loud and watching football. Grandma always let everyone bring their friends over for the meal, so it was a full house. There'd be all kinds of gossip going down, shit talking about so and so's boyfriend or girlfriend. Collie would always start banging on the table, impatient to start eating. Then he'd get in trouble and have to wait till last. It felt like family, real family. But Sunday dinners weren't just special for me. They were also the hot ticket in the neighborhood because cats knew that if they went to Mrs. Holloway's house, they would get to eat good. So throughout the afternoon and evening, people would come over with their hat in their hand. All they had to do was know one of us, and right away my grandmother would invite them into the kitchen. As long as you were hungry, she would feed you. That's probably why I do the same to this day. If I see anyone on the street who's hungry, I'll give them whatever money they need to buy a sandwich or get a meal. My mother rarely let me stay at my grandmother's for more than a weekend, but me, Collie, and Buzzy made sure we made the most of our time together. If we weren't staying up all night watching Godzilla movies or Saturday Night Live, betting each other over who could be the man and stay awake the longest, we'd be playing truth or dare. Although I didn't ever Although I don't ever remember any truths being told. I was always the double dare man. constantly challenging the two of them to try something crazier or more dangerous. Because I was a year older, I was bigger than both of my uncles at the time, taller and probably stronger too. So I had an unfair advantage when it came to anything physical, and I was more reckless. When my grandmother left Lamartine Terrace for a larger house on Warburton Avenue, a few blocks away, there was a back balcony that stuck out about 10 feet from the top of the garage. It wasn't far to jump, but there was a long drop if you slipped. That was a dare that Collie and Buzzy always lost, but I would jump across like it was nothing because I knew that the ability to make it across wasn't the issue. It was more the fear of falling. And at 12 years old, at least around my peers, I was quickly losing that. My grandmother may not have been as strict or as physical as my mother was, but she did know how to teach a child a lesson. The whole time she lived on Lamartine, she told all the kids in the house not to go into the neighbors' yards. The houses on the block were built very close together, so it was easy to end up running around on someone else's property. But Grandma was adamant. We had our own place to play, and that's where we needed to stay. As a kid, I was fascinated by all different kinds of insects, flies, mosquitoes, roaches. I was just curious about them, how they moved around with their tiny bodies and little legs. I always wanted to catch them and see if I could make them drink or eat something. Experimenting one day, I learned that if you put two cockroaches in a jar with a wet napkin and a small piece of hot dog, suddenly you will see little white things all over the place. Those are baby roach eggs. Outside, there was nothing more fascinating to me than a butterfly. They were just so beautiful. So many colors, the way they danced in the air. And one afternoon, sitting on my grandmother's back porch, I saw a huge one fly right by me. It must have been the largest one I had ever seen. I had to catch it. I chased that butterfly all over our backyard, then up and around to the front of the house and down the sidewalk. I just kept darting around. It just kept darting around out of my reach. But I couldn't give up. I chased it around to the back of the house again, over the back porch, and then into the neighbor's yard. Earl! My grandmother saw me and started yelling, Earl, come here now. But I almost had it. Earl, if you don't get your behind. Just as my grandmother was about to come and get me, I caught it. Holding that butterfly in between my two hands as gently as I could, I ran back to the house and raced past my grandmother into the kitchen. I could feel it twitching in my palms. But Grandma, look what I caught. That's very nice, Earl. But you know what I told you about going into other people's yards. What? I wasn't in nobody's yard. Earl, you know what I told you about going into other people's yards. Yes, Grandma. That was the first time my grandmother ever put her hands on me, but I didn't care. All I could think about was that butterfly. Once my spanking was over, I quickly found an empty spaghetti sauce jar to put the butterfly in. She was really big, so I had to crumple her wings a little bit to fit her into the jar. But I did it. She was so beautiful. I couldn't stop staring at her. Collie and Buzzy were very impressed. That night, I put the jar next to my bed and went to sleep happy. When I opened my eyes the next morning, the first thing I did was lean over to inspect my prize, and then I saw something terrible. Oh no, please, no! Her wings, which were thick and bright the night before, had lost their color and had fallen flat, and she wasn't moving. I tried to shake the jar to get the insect moving again, but it was no use. My butterfly was dead. When my grandmother heard me screaming, she came running into the room. Grandma, look what happened, I cried. She looked at me, looked at my jar, then put her head on my shoulder. Baby, did you put holes in the top of that thing? I was crushed. I couldn't believe that I had forgotten to do that. Because of how excited I was when I caught it, because all I was thinking about was how cool it was to have, I didn't give that butterfly a chance to live. Grandma tried to console me, but cried. But I cried and cried. Being selfish, I had fucked around and killed the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. If you love something, let it go. If it comes back to you, it's yours. If it doesn't, it never was. Hold me down, baby. Chapter 5, Earl versus the Board of Education. By the middle of the 5th grade, School 18 still did not know what to do with me. It was like the higher I scored on tests, the further I threw the eraser, and after I left Mrs. Smith's class, none of my teachers ever took me aside anymore. There were no one-on-ones or heart-to-heart conversations. They just punished me and sat me in the back or sent me to the office. I guess my teachers felt it was too much trouble to get into my head and figure out what was wrong. Not that it would have been easy. School 18 was no more than your typical ghetto school, and in Yonkers, the only city in America to have not abided by Brown versus the Board of Education and desegregated their public schools. It was hard to find a good teacher. The best teachers really come to teach poor black kids. But it was the school's main office that started to notice how often I seemed to come into the building with a busted lip or couldn't sit down because of the welts on my behind. One day, when my lip was badly swollen, they pulled me into a meeting with the guidance counselor and asked me what happened. I got a beating. What do you want? What do you mean, what happened? I answered them. This is not the first time that you've come to school this way, Earl, so we would like to take a look at you. When the nurse pulled up my shirt, she saw bruises on my back and on my arms. There were marks going down the back of my legs. That was when the court started talking about taking me away. My mother said that if I just stopped being bad, she wouldn't have to punish me so much. She just didn't know how to get me from doing wrong. So it was suggested that she take me to see a child psychologist, and the next week we went downtown to see a man who worked out of St. Mary's Church next to the hospital. It was cool to miss school, but we left the house really early in the morning and it felt strange. Everything was so quiet. When we got there, the guy talked to my mom first, and I sat in the waiting room. He had a lot of toy cars laid out on the table, and I started playing with them while I waited. When he came out to take me into his office, he asked me if I wanted one of the cars. I got excited because I had been having fun playing with this big red fire truck. It was bigger and nicer than the other plastic ones on the table, and I thought about how I could take it home and add it to my collection of paper airplanes and little green army men. Yeah, I would like this one, I said. Which one do you want? This one. The man looked at my mother and smiled. Oh, you can't have that one, Earl. Why don't you take one of the smaller cars? I started crying right away. I mean, why did he ask me if he wasn't going to give me the one that I wanted? Right then and there, I decided he was full of shit. And I don't know if that was the only reason, but although we went there a few more times, I never spoke to that man about anything. After that, my mother felt she had no other options for me, and by the end of the 5th grade, I had thoroughly zapped out. I was fighting all the kids, throwing chairs at teachers. I just didn't care about anything, so I took it as far as I could. The worst thing a teacher could do was to try to restrain me. Don't fucking touch me. Are you crazy? I'll fucking kill you, you flat ass coffee drinking bitch. I hate when my mother touches me. Get your hands off of me, you motherfucker. Fuck you. We think next year, instead of coming back here, School 18 had it. The judge told my mother that since she was incapable of keeping me out of trouble, the courts had to intervene, and so I was sent to Julia Dykeman Andrus Children's Home, a school dormitory facility about 20 minutes away from our house. The term was 18 months. It was the beginning of my incarceration. I was 10 years old.